and we're live. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Justle podcast. I'm Ernie Raposa, your host, and we have a great panel here today to talk about imposter syndrome. Before we get into the topic of today, we're going to introduce our panel, starting with Dan D'Almeida. Dan is a technologist and product leader in the scientific software industry. He's also the founder of Justle and hails from Massachusetts. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks.
Ali Glaser is an executive performance coach and leadership development specialist focused on one-on-one coaching and team training. She is based in New Jersey. Thank you for joining us from beautiful New Jersey. Ilyse Greenberg is a leadership and career transition coach focused on strengths-based coaching, and Ilyse is coming to us from Boston. Hi, Ilyse. And Ted Tuerk is a business coach and strategist. He specializes in helping small business owners uncover hidden profits and reconnect to the why they started their business. And Ted is joining us from Atlanta or Hotlanta, depending on your experience with Atlanta. Welcome, Ted. And last but not least, Jim Willenbring is a strategy and business consultant and leadership coach focused on healthcare, data analytics, leadership development, and life career coaching. And Jim is based out of St. Paul, Minneapolis. Welcome, Jim.
Hi, everybody.
All right, let's get into this. So today we're talking about imposter syndrome, and we hear about a lot of that in the news around how people wrestle with this preventing them from fully achieving what they're setting out to do. And it's kind of a saboteur as we as coaches have dug into this with our clients. Who can define this a little bit more, either clinically or what the textbook definition is of imposter syndrome?
Well, I'll jump in and just say, I think it's in short, I think it's a crisis of confidence. That's how I view it. There are textbook definitions. There are lots of hundreds and thousands of Google articles on the topic, but it's a crisis of confidence, really, and it's titled in a way that really makes it like pathological, and it's not a disease. It's not a syndrome. It's when you just lose your confidence in certain situations, and we'll get more into that. But that's how I define it really briefly.
Yeah. I guess technically it's the idea that people walking into a situation, usually in a professional environment, is that they feel like they're not qualified to be there, and that, quote unquote, they're a fraud in what they're doing, that whatever, usually it's high achieving professionals, and that wherever they are, they got there by luck or circumstance. And the people that they're surrounded by don't really understand that they don't know what they're doing. And so it does certainly, obviously confidence being a component, and also just we then tend to sabotage ourselves if we have that feeling about us walking into a situation like that.
What I noticed was that when you announced that we're a panel talking about the imposter syndrome, I all of a sudden had the feeling of the imposter syndrome. It is so
exactly.
slick and slippery, and it can appear out of nowhere, and it can appear almost about anything. It's just it's doubt, self-doubt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think, Jim?
Hey, Ernie, I think it's helpful to define what it isn't too. Yeah. And I think one of the areas that I think it shouldn't be considered is in that, as for example, new job learning curve, right? I don't think that should be imposter syndrome, because I think that's something, you're switching a job, you've got new responsibilities, that piece of it. I think that element is really, really different, compared to somebody who has kind of a crushing kind of self-opinion that really negatively impacts what they believe about themselves, right? And then the confidence piece, as Ali said, and then how they might show up in their job to others and how they relate to others. So I think we all need to give ourselves a little bit of self-compassion when we're doing essentially a lot of something new, right? Something where we're learning or stretching ourselves. And I think equating that with imposter syndrome, I think you just got to take a breath and give yourself some time to be able to adjust. So I think there's this concept when you go from this is when you get in a new job and you're thinking about, I don't really know what I don't know, right? And there's this realization point, and I think in the coaching world, sometimes we might call that going from unconscious incompetence, right, to conscious incompetence, right? Saying, oh my gosh, there's so much I don't know, right? And you have to go through those phases to start feeling competent in your job and start giving yourself some time and expertise and experience and learning to be able to kind of get through those initial phases. So
yeah, great perspective, Jim.
But our saboteurs aren't necessarily known for giving us a break, though, right? So we're trying to learn something, and we're struggling with it. Sometimes it is a challenge to give yourself a little bit of grace and room,
right?
And that's where the imposter likes to stick his head in.
Right. Well, somebody's going to come. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say it comes from that great saying that you hear all the time: "Fake it till you make it." Right. And that's some ways breaking down that imposter syndrome for you. I mean, I'm not a coach. I'm using this as free therapy with all of you.
Coaching is not therapy.
Yeah, or find free coaching. I've reinvented my career so many times. I started as a scientist to a technologist, and now to Ted's point on a podcast. And I don't really know much about podcasts. Am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? Can other people do it better? And it really brings up that chip away of, how do I do this? And is someone going to find out that I really don't know what I'm doing? And I've always taken both sides as a level of empowerment, right? So one, if you're overconfident, you might fail because you don't look for the dropouts there. And two, if you're underconfident, you're kind of chipping away your own capabilities there. But I use that and leverage it to learn, right? What don't I know, and how can I learn more a little bit about that? But yeah, I'm super interested to hear everybody's viewpoints here.
Yeah, there's also another component. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jim.
Well, just Dan, you mentioned the comment "fake it till you make it." I think the imposter is in that phrase, right? The fake it piece, right? I don't know. A different saying would be kind of be vulnerable until you make it, right? Might be another way to think about that.
Yeah. And Jim, that's so interesting. Glad you went first, because I think there is another piece to this, which is a little bit more environmental, culture, systemic about when we show up in different situations. And so I love the be vulnerable until you make it. I think it's a question of us knowing when we're in an environment we're allowed to be vulnerable. I think a lot of times, and overwhelmingly, when we're trying to be our authentic selves, we're actually criticized for that. That's not a workplace type of persona to have. And I think all of us kind of have bought into the idea that we bring our whole selves wherever we go, because that's where we're at our greatest. But I think that the vulnerability is one of the issues, is how do we know who we can be vulnerable with and when? And some people, I think, are just better at knowing that than other people.
Yeah. And I think there's power in articulating what you don't know to pile on the vulnerability element here, because folks will come to you. Folks will recognize that 9 times out of 10, vulnerability brings trust and engagement. And you'll always have those folks that may not recognize that as a way to collaborate, and that may be a warning sign that's a culture you don't want to join. Right. If you're not joining an organization that fosters that, we know there's going to be a learning curve. We know there's a period of where we'll need you to understand the roles and responsibilities and everything you're coming into. So it's important to not sell yourself short either. To go to let's say for that pendulum to swing too far in the vulnerability space, because you don't want to undersell yourself and everything you bring to the table either. That, hey, I have these wonderful abilities and I'm bringing myself into this organization. I just need to know who's who in the zoo and understand more of the role. But just give me some time to suss that out, right? And that's okay. That has to be okay.
When I was thinking about what we're going to discuss today, what is it that the listener or viewer might want to, how could we be of service to them, right?
Yeah.
And what came to my mind was to really understand how detrimental this imposter syndrome can be for one person in their relationships and their career. And so kind of like, what are the triggers about it? What are the triggers for it? What behaviors represent that you're going through the imposter syndrome, or the imposter is there, not going through the imposter syndrome, the imposter is there. And then, what are some of those negative outcomes that you need to be aware of, and how do we move that from a negative to a positive?
Yeah, I love that because, I was reading the article that Ernie sent prior to this, and one of their comments was, confidence doesn't equal competence, right? And I really love that, because there's often this behavior with some people that their title or their degree level means they can't be wrong. They just feel like, I've gone to this point and it's there's no way I'm wrong. And I sort of use the feeling of imposter syndrome as a skill, because to me, I always question, all right, are there other ways to look at this? Are there better ways? Do I need to learn a little bit more and do some research? And maybe that's a little scientist in me of always wants to do a little bit more research, but it helps me progress in my own career.
Yeah.
Dan, I would love to build on that by also saying that there are systems in place in our workplaces and our work cultures where some people feel they can't be right. And that's based on, sexism, heterosexism, racism, all of those systemic inequalities that are rooted in our workplace culture are often the reason why imposter syndrome appears for many people, especially women, and especially women of BIPOC individuals.
Yeah, well, and that's a great point, Ali. And I know we compare notes coming in advance of this panel, so we have some meaty things to dig into. And Jim had referenced this HBR article that is right in that vein, Ali. And the title of the article is "Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome." And I won't steal your thunder, Jim, if you want to dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, no, and I think it really segues from what Ali was talking about, which is organizations can have, I would say, even toxic cultures, right? That, again, for women, for, BIPOC individuals, essentially anybody who doesn't necessarily fit into, what's probably considered the kind of dominant, expectations, right, within that organization. And I think part of it gets to is we have to be really careful that that onus doesn't sit on the individual's shoulders. That you have to look at the culture of the organization and how much bias is there, and really, I would say the leaders who might be listening to this call, take some ownership, right, over what is the culture, what is the how are they being inclusive, right? In the diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of forces that are out there, they're adding the B letter, belonging, right? And I think there's so much about belonging and about being really wide and broad in how you define people's contributions. And as we talked about earlier, how can you allow people to be authentic in how they can show up? And that authenticism, if there's a word like that, right? And how broad is that, right? How broad can you make it so that people really feel welcome and contributing? And I think that, going back, Ted, to come to Ted earlier, I think those are some of the, I would say, environmental pieces that can contribute to more and more people having imposter syndrome, right, within an organization. And I think there's just as much responsibility on the people who set that tone and set that culture for essentially, instituting that within people, or essentially having an environment that really fosters that, which is not really what you want to have happen.
And some of the ways I think environmentally or within an organization is just having mentorship type programs, having clear understanding of what are performance metrics or what we are being evaluated on and promoted on, and are those things that are in line with who we are. A lot of times I think we reward We reward behaviors that may be contrary to showing your authentic self. And so, or the people that are rewarded maybe don't necessarily have those attributes. And there's a fear of showing some of that. And so I think there's a lot of things in an organization we can do. And then also individually, I'll just jump in. There's a few things I think, as I was thinking about it, that we could do. And the first one I'll say is just show remember your strengths as an individual, know why you're there, know how, know who you are and what your characteristics and talents are independent of what environment you're in. So you are bringing this unique combination of skills and talents and capabilities wherever you go. And the more we remember that, the more obviously confidence we have, but also understanding of how we can use those talents in a way to do our job well. Apologies for the dog that's barking behind me. Another one is kind of that mentorship, which is like phone a friend. And it's really very much about, who can we reach out to in those situations? Because I think a lot of times we think it's only when we're starting a new job, but it becomes really insidious when we're already in a job and we feel like we no longer have the right to ask questions. We no longer, we should know things. And yet we have a presentation or we're doing something and we feel even more vulnerable. So like reaching out to a trusted friend within an organization or even just a friend or relative who knows us well is someone who can give, that objective perspective on, where do we really have shortcomings and where, and where don't we? And then I think the final thing is like, for me, it's just connecting to your purpose or the meaning and the reason why you're putting yourself out there. And so if we're putting ourselves out there, maybe it's to achieve a personal goal. We tie to that goal and say that whatever fear we have now or whatever we're feeling now is worth it because of what we're achieving. And especially if that's a higher purpose or a community purpose where it's for the good of others, then we feel like maybe we're not as important and our imposter syndrome doesn't get the best of us because, becomes a little bit too egocentric at that point. So I think those are kind of just all of my thoughts as I had been thinking about this stuff.
Well, that's great, Ilyse, and I think just an example, a cross section of everything you just said is a lot of us have shared our self-assessments with one another, whether it's positive intelligence or Enneagram or whatever. So we know one another well enough to see when we're not bringing our true selves to something, or we're letting our saboteurs overwhelm us. And we call one another out on it. We do that a lot. It's great to see that in action. And for me personally, it's been a transformative experience. And I wish everybody could have the network that we've built because it's so helpful.
Yeah, I think along those lines, Ernie, what comes up for me is when I think about working with clients. I think one of the things that is just inherent in all of the work I do with clients is building them up, and not falsely so, not telling people things because they're paying me to, but because I think that one of the foundational things that I see in coaching clients is lacking confidence. It maybe not entirely, but at least on the issues that we're talking about and that we're working on. And it's so easy, especially, as friends, as individuals, as a coach, to see the strengths in people. And at least you're trained in that. We have keen eyes for like looking at people's, superpowers, whatever we want to call them. But I think that when it comes to ourselves as the six of us, ourselves as the clients that we're working with, our colleagues, that it's sometimes so easy to go to the deficit level thinking rather than strengths-based thinking.
Well, and our lizard brain is trained to go for problems, right? We're wired to go negative because we want to look for problems to solve, to make sure that we don't get eaten by a tiger or a bear or whatever. So we have to overcome that kind of primal instinct to look for danger everywhere. I was going to just add, no, that's fine. I mean, in the workplace, again, I'm not a coach, but, I do run a team. Yeah. And, one of the things I always try to do when I meet with my team individually, and I always try to start the meeting with, what do you need? What do you want to discuss? Which is might be a little contrary to, 20, 30 years ago, where it's just like, your team is there to serve you. And,
modern leaders should really be asking, how can I help you, and where are you stuck,
Right.
and how can we get past these
servant leadership.
Yeah, exactly. And really help them out, because, again, I work in technology. And so I kind of grab people from different sectors, and they might not be familiar with the industry we're in. And again, I see that as a positive, because they're going to ask the right questions. They're going to, not do the status quo of like, oh, this is just the way we've always done it. Well, why? Let's get past that. Right. And so you need to dig in and really help your team and let them be confident and bring out the questions, or, in that safe place of the one-on-ones or as a team, and really understand what they need and kind of foster that skill level.
Dan, I think one of the most intuitive things how I assess people sometimes is the depth of the questions they ask. So here, imposter syndrome is often about being afraid to ask those questions for fearing like you don't know what you're talking about. Whereas as a leader, I'm looking at, what are your questions? Tell me what your questions are. That's gonna give me a sense of somebody's intellect and depth of thinking oftentimes.
Ted actually just started doing that here with us. Ted, I mean, you had said, how can we serve the people who are going to be listening to this, right? And that's a great example of it.
Yeah.
And Ted, you were going to say something.
One-on-one sessions that a couple, as a coach, we're trying to identify the gap, right? And so some of these things I hear that gives me some clues is, one is that they, in their job, they hold their cards too close. They don't share enough. There's some vulnerability that needs to be there. They lash out when they get corrected or something doesn't go their way. So maybe have a little bit of a temper. They're the avoidance, right? Have a client who will show up late for meetings to a big piece of it, and that's because there's some imposter syndrome on. We all can do this too, right? Work on the wrong stuff. Work on the stuff that needs to be done, but not necessarily the most important, because the important stuff. Important stuff can challenge that, and that imposter, that feeling of not being worthy, pops in, and then and sometimes it'll be you can see the other part of the ego pop up, that they will be way too heavy on the self promotion, and that is also potentially a sign of that imposter.
Right, and to in the vein of keeping in mind who our audience is and who we're trying to serve here through this panel, thanks for bringing us back to center there, Ted, because I see hiring managers listening to this, I see leaders, I see job seekers, and I think a key element here folks should be understanding is that you're in that job interview for a reason. You're in that role for a reason. Somebody saw something in you that they needed in their organization. So lean into that and know that you may not have everything they need, but you have most of what they need. So trust in that, and don't be swayed by that doubt. The other question that popped up for me as we were talking here is around, we talked about gender and race being a factor in imposter syndrome. What about generational? Like, as we look at folks who are boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, Z, right? Do we see that manifest across spectrum of clients that we've worked with, or folks who are out in the job market? Is that something that you'd say that is universal, or is it confined to a certain kind of demographic segment?
I mean, there's definitely ageism out there, right? I mean,
as
people get further in their careers, there's no way this young whippersnapper knows more than me, and I've got the experience and I know what to do. And I feel like personally that's a sad approach, because technology is evolving so quickly, and my young kids are teaching me stuff about phones that I should know, but they just grew up with it, and it's just intuitive and natural to them. And that they don't have a different way of looking at it as we did, right? So they're just kind of evolving very quickly with these technologies, or other factors in their life. But so I think we need to learn from both age generations.
Yeah. And I'm seeing it from the other side, being a little bit older and having some clients that are a little bit older, that they are not technically native or savvy as the younger ones, but they have a wealth of experience. And how do we help them rely on that, use that as a tool?
Yeah. And I think that's so true. It was as Jim had said, with the unconscious, the unconscious competence to the conscious competence, I think there is kind of this learning curve that we feel like we've gone through in our careers, is that, or I feel I was a lot smarter when I was in my 20s than I am in my 50s. And I know that there's a whole generation out there coming up, and that is probably perennial for generations. It also, as we've learned, the youngest generation now coming into working does have a certain tone to it that is different. And there is, and probably to Dan's point, like they do know more about technology, and that is changing things so much that they have a right and believe and have been trained to be critical thinkers, that they really do feel that. And so then the older people are kind of wondering, where's our place, to Ted's point. And so I think we all have to just kind of acknowledge the other, kind of the different people. Ernie, you said it so well, and I do believe, like, if we know ourselves really well, our own, have our own confidence, we're not threatened by others. And the more we learn about ourselves and about others, the more we understand how we can work together. But I do think that the generational thing, it's real on all ends, and maybe that's just human nature.
I have a funny story to share about my own probably first encounter with imposter syndrome, although I don't know that was a term that I recognized back then. So I was probably 30 or so, and I was doing a lot of teaching and training in my work, and I was teaching a course on sexual health, and I was hired to do a training for medical students. And I heard medical students, and I'm thinking, I'm going to train doctors, like, me and my MSW and my sexual health certification at the time, like, well, I'm training doctors, like, oh my, so there's like an age, and then there's a title status, right? Probably some gender, bias in there as well. And then I got there, and I realized that, like, I focused so much on the medical part that I forgot to focus on the medical school part. These were like first year medical students, most of whom are fresh out of college. They were 23 years old, had some degree of information about sexual health, but I definitely stood in my confidence, realizing I had an expertise here that they did not have. And so to this day, I think about that, and I'm like, that was almost 20 years ago. And I think about, well, I put so much pressure and emphasis on the wrong thing and walked in thinking, what do I have to offer? And quite frankly, like, it was a lot for that particular audience, So I always tell people about that when I'm helping them, think through their own feelings of potential incompetence.
And how important that work is that you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Ted.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's a theme about I know the definition of humility, right? It's not being humble, it's not being meek, it's not being modest. It's that, I think Brene Brown, I was reading the Atlas of the Heart book that she's got, right? She defines it as something like being open to new learning, but also having a kind of a really balanced, healthy assessment of your strengths, your imperfections, right? Your areas for you to develop and learn going forward. So it's both, right? It's that element of both. And I think that gets back to, Ali, your comments earlier about confidence, right? If you know where you're strong and also where you want to learn versus I'm weak here, right? I think there's a I would call it a mindset, or kind of a growth mindset, right? That can be really helpful to try to develop in yourself, right? For that piece of it as well. So
absolutely.
Yeah, and I forget the way to rephrase that. A lot of the fitness coaches do this, where you don't say I can't do that. It's like, well, I'm currently working towards this. So reframing that in your mind. And another trigger point for me, as you were all sharing your thoughts, is just around people in general. For the most part, everybody wants one another to succeed. And I'm a big fan of Ted Lasso. I don't know if everyone has watched Ted Lasso, but one of the quotes from Ted Lasso is, all people are different people, right? And everybody brings something unique and important and valuable to the table. And it's just a matter of recognizing that and appreciating that. just like you all did today. So I love this conversation. We could probably talk for another 2 hours about this and about all the books we should read about this to learn more about it. But this was fantastic.
I got one last thought I would like to share for.
Yeah, go for it, Ted. Yeah.
So the imposter is doubt, right?
Yeah.
But the most he is. I say he because I'm talking about my imposter, right? He is most dangerous when he portrays himself as wise and knowledgeable. He tries to make you think that he is an ally, but he is not. He is a saboteur. And you need to have strategies to handle your saboteurs. Acknowledge it, move it back. That's the coach in me right there.
I love it.
Love that, Ted.
I love it. All right, so we'll take that as a final thought from Ted. Any final thoughts from other folks on the panel as we wrap up here?
Well, I just want to mention a couple of books that have helped me along the way. And there's one book called Reach by Andy Molinsky, who's a professor at Brandeis University. And then also I came across the book Chatter by Ethan Kross, who's I think professor at University of Michigan. And Reach is about, getting out of your comfort zone, and Chatter, so importantly, is how we address those saboteurs. And there's just and the Chatter book has so many concrete, really real ways of trying to calm that voice inside of our heads that are telling us all those things, for me, it just changed a lot in giving me some really tactical things that I can do. So I just wanted to share that because it was important to me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ilyse.
And I would add on to, what both Ted and Ilyse have talked about, which is so knowing and understanding who your saboteurs are, what do their voices sound like, right? What kind of urges and emotions kind of show up, and how they can, again, take the shape of helping you, right? I think at the same time is identify, what is that essence inside of yourself, right? What are those sages, right, that you can tap into and grow and really understand what do those sound like, what do those look like, and how do you amplify those and be able to touch those metaphorically, right, or physically, so that you can essentially boost your confidence, right, and really kind of quiet some of those imposter feelings and emotions.
Awesome.
I would add that I've reframed the phrase "good luck" to "you've got this." I always tell people, "You've got this," and there's that famous quote that luck is when opportunity meets preparation. It's not about,
I love it.
Didn't just fall on your lap, that job that 5,000 other people applied to, right? You got it because you were prepared for the opportunity that presented itself. So go with that that degree of confidence. It's not good luck. It's you've got this. I
love it. I'm going to steal that, Ali.
I'm licensing it, so
I'll send the royalty check, but I love it. Thanks, Ali. Dan.
I was trying to think back, and I was fortunate enough to be part of an acquisition at one point in my career, and I found it really interesting that a lot of people during the acquisition were just afraid that they were going to get fired and laid off. Right, that was their immediate reaction. Oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. And to me, it just struck me as, why? You are literally the world expert at your job. Like, you're the world expert on your day-to-day on what you do. Why are you afraid that someone else, there's an equal part of you somewhere else that's just going to come in and be able to do what you do? And I think people need to think of it that way, right? I mean, I know there's titles and we all have similar skills, but your experiences put you where you were, right? And your day-to-day work or lifestyle is what makes you unique. So just keep kind of thinking of it that way, right? You're the world expert at you, and kind of go a little bit more confident into it. You can still ask questions, but have a little more confidence.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Dan, for closing thoughts here. And this was actually your idea to have this specific topic because of the things you've seen out there talking to people as part of getting Justle off the ground. So thanks for wrapping us up. believe it or not, we are at time. So I want to thank everyone, Ali, Ilyse, Jim, Ted, Dan, for coming together this morning and talking about this very important topic. I will post links for all of the let's say articles we mentioned, books we threw out, ideas and concepts, and we'll get this posted so folks can enjoy the conversation. Thanks so much, and thank you all listeners for coming and listening to this, and have a fantastic day. Take care.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.